The first time the galaxy heard the word Leviathan, it wasn't from human lips. It was a whisper carried through encrypted transmissions between alien fleets, a sound tinged with disbelief and fear. At first, it seemed like some wild rumor, an exaggerated war story meant to frighten rivals. But the reports kept coming. Patrol fleets vanishing without distress calls. Stations found drifting, their power cores still warm but their crews gone. Entire sectors falling silent in a matter of hours. No one knew who was responsible, but the pieces of evidence, small fragments of exotic alloys, traces of impossible energy signatures, pointed toward one unsettling possibility: humans. In the old days, the galaxy thought they understood humanity. A young species, reckless, fiercely loyal to their own, but limited in reach. They fought like no one else, yes, but their fleets were modest, their technology creative but not unmatched. The older civilizations believed they could predict humanity's limits. They were wrong. The truth began to surface when a scout drone, an advanced model belonging to the Redhari Collective, transmitted its final images before being torn apart. The feed was shaky, distorted by radiation storms, but one frame survived clearly enough to make every High Council across the stars lean forward in dread. There, emerging from the darkness of deep space, was a warship so vast it blotted out the light of a nearby gas giant. The drone's telemetry measured its size, thousands of kilometers across, with a hull that shimmered like molten metal cooling under ice. A ship the size of a planet. And it wasn't alone. Hidden in the drone's last seconds of life was another shape, then another, sliding out from behind the shadows of moons, their silhouettes eclipsing entire swaths of stars. No single civilization had ever attempted such a thing. The resources alone would bankrupt entire empires. The engineering? Beyond the comprehension of most species. Yet there they were, 3 human-made leviathans drifting forward like gods of war. No official statement came from Earth. No threat, no demand, no declaration. The galaxy was left to wonder whether these planet-sized warships were weapons of defense or an unstoppable fist ready to crush resistance. But their silence spoke louder than any war cry. On the frontier worlds, panic spread. Merchants abandoned trade routes that brushed against human territory. Smaller governments rushed to declare neutrality, hoping to be ignored. But the larger powers, the ones that had fought humanity before, reacted with something colder than fear. They began preparing for war. Somewhere in the outer rim, aboard a small civilian ship, I watched the first grainy recordings of these giants in motion. I'd heard rumors for years, but seeing them was something else entirely. It felt like staring at an approaching storm that you knew could erase everything in its path. Even at maximum magnification, the ships moved slowly, almost lazily, like predators that had never once needed to run. The largest of them, I noticed, bore a surface marked with scars, ancient craters and burns that told a silent history of battles survived. The others were pristine as if freshly built. The thought that there might be more, unseen in the void, made my hands shake. I couldn't shake the question that was starting to echo through every network, every hidden meeting. Why now? Humanity had never shown such power before. Building one ship that size would take centuries for most species, and yet the humans had built several without anyone noticing. That meant they'd been preparing in secret for longer than anyone realized. But for what? A transmission came through on a private channel later that night. A voice, human but unfamiliar, spoke without introduction. "They think they've seen the fleet," he said, calm as if discussing the weather. "They haven't." Then the line went dead. Sleep was impossible after that. Outside my viewport the stars felt different. Not the scattered lights I had grown up with, but a fragile curtain that could be torn away in an instant. The galaxy's balance had always been delicate, an unspoken agreement between powers that no one civilization would tip the scales too far. But with the Leviathans that balance was gone. It wasn't just military power. It was the psychological weight of knowing humanity could reshape the political map of the stars in a single campaign. I wasn't the only one feeling it. Reports came in from deep space listening posts that claimed to have detected more massive energy spikes across several sectors, possibly more warships activating. Alien fleets began shadowing human borders, desperate to track any movement. Skirmishes flared in the dark, and each time the outcome was the same: human ships, no matter the odds, emerging intact. It was becoming clear these planet-sized warships weren't just for show. They were moving, slowly, methodically, toward somewhere. The question was whether they were going to destroy, to conquer, or to defend. None of the options felt safe. Whispers began circulating of a central directive back on Earth, a plan set in motion generations ago. Some said humanity had always known that the galaxy would eventually unite against them, and the Leviathans were their answer, a deterrent so absolute that no alliance could stand against it. Others believed it wasn't about war at all, but about survival. Something was coming, something worse than any enemy we'd known, and these ships were humanity's only hope. But the thing about the galaxy is, fear doesn't wait for the truth. The balance had already shattered. Alliances were forming overnight. Armies mobilized. For the first time in centuries, ancient rivalries were put aside, not out of peace but out of shared terror. And through it all, humanity said nothing. No public appearances. No press statements. Just those silent, impossible giants drifting forward through the void. Then came the sighting that changed everything. A mining colony on the far edge of the Ethran Belt reported that one of the Leviathans had arrived in their sector. It didn't fire. It didn't hail. It simply stopped, hanging in space like a mountain that had decided to float. 4 days it remained there, unmoving, its shadow covering the colony's entire horizon. People reported feeling vibrations through the ground as if the ship's engines, or whatever powered it, were humming at a frequency beyond hearing. On the 6th day the Leviathan moved again, but not alone. Behind it, a smaller ship emerged, still enormous by most standards but tiny compared to the giant leading it. The smaller ship carried markings from a long-forgotten human expedition that had vanished decades ago. And inside, according to intercepted transmissions, were survivors. Human survivors, who claimed they'd been rescued from something the galaxy had no name for. The recording ended before anyone could get details, but one phrase carried through the static, a voice raw with urgency. Asterisk, you don't understand, this isn't a weapon. It's a shield. And it's too late. Asterisk. The feed cut there. No further transmissions were received from the colony. No debris was found. Only empty space where thousands of lives had been the day before. And now, 3 more Leviathans have been sighted on the move. Headed somewhere none of us want to imagine. The first images were grainy, almost like the sensors couldn't decide if they were real. Across the holoscreen, the warship loomed, if you could even call it that. It wasn't a ship in the traditional sense. It was a floating continent, a moving city the size of a small planet, bristling with weapons arrays so large that each turret could house a fleet inside. The galaxy had seen powerful ships before, even legendary dreadnoughts, but nothing on this scale. It felt wrong, unnatural, like staring at a mountain that could somehow move under its own power. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the monitors. Officers stared, jaws tight, eyes locked. Even the most seasoned veterans, the ones who had seen black holes devour stars and war fleets reduced to drifting wrecks, were frozen in place. Humanity had been underestimated for so long, mocked, pushed aside, treated as latecomers to the interstellar stage. And now, with one impossible vessel, they had overturned everything. But this wasn't a victory parade. It was a warning. The images were intercepted transmissions from deep within contested space. Nobody knew how the footage had leaked or if it was even meant to be seen. But the war councils across 100 worlds had already begun whispering. Some called it a bluff, a staged spectacle to intimidate. Others, those who understood engineering, those who had studied human behavior, knew better. Humanity didn't bluff when it came to survival. The captain in the room, a tall, hard-eyed woman with a voice like iron, didn't speak for a long time. She just studied the rotating image of the warship, each pass revealing more detail. Sprawling armored sections, engines like chained suns, hangar bays wide enough to swallow moons. Finally she exhaled, the sound sharp in the stillness. If they have one, she said quietly, they have more. That was the fear. Not that this behemoth existed, but that it wasn't alone. The galaxy's balance had been carefully kept for centuries, held together by fragile treaties and the unspoken understanding that no single faction could dominate all others. A planet-sized warship didn't just tilt that balance, it smashed it to pieces. Out on the edge of the galactic rim, rumors began spreading faster than official reports could contain them. Miners on asteroid colonies swore they'd seen something massive moving against the backdrop of the stars. Freight captains told stories of passing through debris fields littered with the twisted remains of enemy fleets, still burning in the void. And always there was the same haunting detail. They never saw the warship itself, only the destruction it left behind. The humans had been quiet for decades, keeping to their borders, rebuilding from their last great war. They'd played the part of the underdog well, humble, even cooperative in the council chambers. But the truth was beginning to surface. While the galaxy debated and politicked, humanity had been building in silence. And what they had built was unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. One intelligence officer, hands trembling as he adjusted the playback, pointed out details others had missed. "Look here," he said, zooming in on a section of the hull. The image resolved into an array of shimmering panels, some kind of adaptive armor that shifted color and texture like the surface of a living organism. "It's absorbing scans. That's why we didn't detect them sooner. The entire hull's a sensor cloak." The captain didn't flinch. "Then we can assume it can appear anywhere at any time." Nobody in the room disagreed. And yet, there was something else gnawing at the edges of the mystery. If humanity truly had this kind of power, why reveal it now? Why move such a massive ship into contested space where it could be seen, even filmed? Theories spread like wildfire. Maybe they were sending a message, maybe it was a test run, maybe it was bait for a trap so elaborate no one could yet see the shape of it. Far from the council chambers, a young officer sat in a dimly lit barracks, replaying the leaked footage on a private datapad. He wasn't a commander or a politician, just one of thousands assigned to a border patrol fleet. But as he studied the sheer scale of the warship, something stirred in him. It wasn't just fear. It was awe. The kind that makes you realize the universe is far bigger and far stranger than you thought. And deep down he suspected that the warship was only the beginning. The galaxy was reacting, yes, but slowly, cautiously. Meanwhile, the humans weren't sitting still. Reports filtered in of strange energy readings from deep space, gravitational anomalies hinting at the movement of colossal masses. Entire star systems were going dark, their comm relays suddenly offline. Whether those systems had fallen to the warship or were simply hiding, no one could say. But the pattern was growing, like a shadow spreading through the stars. The fear wasn't just that humanity could win a war now. It was that no one knew what their endgame was. Were they preparing to seize territory? To impose control over the council worlds? Or was this something far more dangerous? A move against a threat the rest of the galaxy didn't yet understand? A message intercepted from an encrypted human channel only deepened the uncertainty. It was short, the voice calm, deliberate, almost too quiet to hear. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting clearance for planetary maneuver. That was all. No explanation. No coordinates. Just a promise of movement, the kind of movement only a warship the size of a planet could make. And still, no one could explain how it had been built without anyone knowing. Even the most paranoid intelligence networks had found nothing. No missing resources on a scale this massive, no rumors of megashipyards, no worker revolts. The sheer logistics were mind-bending. Some began to whisper about hidden colonies, deep space manufacturing hubs tucked inside gas giant atmospheres, or asteroid belts mined so far from inhabited space that no sensors would ever catch the activity. The captain closed the briefing with a sentence that sent a chill through everyone present. "From this moment on," she said, "every ship you see in the void could be bait, and every quiet sector could be hiding a planet-sized monster. Don't forget that." Far above a nameless system on the edge of known space, the warship itself drifted silently, its engines dormant, its shadow blotting out starlight. Inside its armored heart, something was moving. Preparations for a journey that would not end until the galaxy itself understood exactly what humanity was capable of. And somewhere deep in the vessel's command core, a voice spoke the words that would send ripples of dread across every inhabited world. "Begin Phase 2. If you want, I can now take this moment and push it directly into the high-stakes twist setup for the next part, so the cliffhanger becomes even sharper and the war theme more intense before we reach the climax. Would you like me to continue that way?" The fleet drifted in perfect formation, their shadows blotting out entire continents as they passed. Even at this distance, the planet-sized warships seemed impossibly vast, their curved hulls swallowing starlight. Inside the main command deck, the air felt heavier than it should. Every breath was drawn with effort, not because of the ship's systems, but because of the moment. They were on the edge of something no one could turn back from. No one spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't just strategy, it was fear. Even the hum of the engines felt subdued, as if the ships themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the galaxy waited. Scattered fleets watching from the shadows. They weren't allies. They weren't friends. They were predators who had been certain of their dominance, until now. The humans hadn't revealed their full strength before. That had been deliberate. But now, as these colossal ships moved into position, there was no more hiding. The enemy had seen the scale. And they understood, maybe for the first time, that they were not untouchable. One of the junior officers kept glancing at the central holomap. Every few seconds, new signals appeared, small movements from hostile fleets, shifting into patterns that could only mean one thing. They were regrouping. This wasn't going to be a standoff much longer. They were going to strike. The realization made a chill pass through the crew. Orders were given quietly without fanfare. Shield arrays cycled to full strength. Weapon systems came online one by one, their status lights painting the control room in alternating flashes of green and amber. Even so, the crew's movements weren't frantic. It was precision. This was what humanity had been building toward for decades in secret. Still, knowing that didn't make the tension any less sharp. On the far edge of the system, the enemy armada began to align. Hundreds of ships, some of them massive by galactic standards, but now they seemed like ants next to the human behemoths. And yet, they were coming. The warships could shatter them, but numbers still mattered. If the enemy got close enough, sheer volume of fire could breach even these new titans. Every human aboard understood the stakes. This wasn't just a battle. It was the moment the galaxy decided whether humanity was a species to respect, or one to destroy before it could rise any higher. And the galaxy would not choose lightly. A low tremor passed through the deck as the first warship adjusted position. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a mountain turning. Energy readings spiked. A warning tone pulsed in the background, enemy long-range weapons locking in. The air in the command deck felt electric, every heartbeat sinking to the unspoken countdown everyone sensed was coming. There was a flicker on the comms. Not a transmission, something stranger. A single burst of data encrypted in a way no known species used. It came from deep space, far beyond any friendly outpost. The analysts scrambled to decode it, their eyes narrowing as lines of alien script scrolled across the screen. The translation wasn't complete, but the few words they managed to pull out made the commander's face tighten. Asterisk not alone. Wait for the signal. Asterisk. The message was short. The meaning unclear. But its timing couldn't be coincidence. The commander didn't share it with the crew yet, there wasn't time and no certainty. Instead, the focus returned to the battle forming before them. The enemy was accelerating. The nearest hostile ships crossed into the range perimeter. Massive targeting arrays swung into position, locking onto them with silent precision. The enemy's formation wasn't chaotic now, they moved like a single organism, swarming toward the flanks of the planet-sized warships. They knew they couldn't match the front-facing firepower. They were going for the weak points if there were any. Inside the crew's chests, the pressure built. No one wanted to admit it, but this was the most dangerous part, not the fight itself but the seconds before it began. Those seconds stretched endlessly as if time resisted moving forward. A sensor officer's voice cracked slightly as they called out readings. Asterisk multiple warp signatures. Unknown origin. Asterisk all eyes went to the main display. Dozens, no hundreds, of distortions were opening in space on the far side of the enemy fleet. Shapes emerged from the shimmering light. But these weren't human. They weren't enemy. They were something else. The deck was suddenly alive with speculation, but the commander's expression didn't change. He stared at the display, calculating. Whoever these newcomers were, their arrival would tip the balance, one way or another. And then, without warning, the enemy fired first. Beams of energy like liquid lightning tore through space, slamming against the shields of the nearest human warship. The impact lit up the darkness in a burst of violent color, and the sound, though space had no sound, seemed to reverberate in the bones of every crew member. No orders were given yet. Not until they knew who was coming through those new warp signatures. The ships kept emerging, their designs unlike anything in the galactic database. Smooth curved hulls. No visible weapons. Their arrival was silent, almost ominous. The human warships held fire, even as the enemy closed in. Seconds felt like hours. The galaxy's balance, its future, was now hanging on the actions of forces no one fully understood. And somewhere deep inside every human aboard, a thought took root. This battle wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. The commander finally spoke, his voice low but unshakable. Asterisk hold your fire until I say. Watch them. Every move. Asterisk. Outside, space seemed to tighten, like the breath before a storm breaks. The next moment would decide everything, and no one knew if they would survive it. The alarms blared again, sharper this time, cutting through the low hum of the ship's systems. Everyone in the command deck froze for half a second, then moved with renewed urgency. The planet-sized warship loomed on the tactical display, still distant but closing in faster than predicted. Its presence wasn't just a physical threat, it was a statement, a challenge that rippled through every soul aboard the human fleet. The comms officer's voice shook as she reported a new reading. It's not alone. The words hung heavy in the air. One by one, the displays updated, revealing two more massive signatures emerging from the edge of the system. 3 planet-sized battleships now, their sheer scale dwarfing even the mightiest vessels humanity had previously faced. It didn't make sense. The galaxy had thought humanity possessed only one of these colossal ships, a myth made real that had already shaken the balance of power. Now, to see 3 bearing down at once, it rewrote every calculation, every strategy. The fleet's captain didn't shout. His voice was steady, almost calm, but there was steel in it. Get me every ship within range. Tight formation. We're not scattering, not this time. There was no bravado, only a grim understanding that the battle ahead was unlike anything they had trained for. Outside, space felt smaller. The void was filled with movement. Smaller cruisers adjusting their vectors, escorts sliding into defensive positions, drone squadrons launching in swarms. The planet-sized ships still had the distance advantage, but they carried with them a kind of inevitability, as if each kilometer they closed stripped away another layer of hope. In the crew quarters, whispers traveled faster than official reports. Some spoke of an alien alliance desperate to crush humanity before it became unstoppable. Others murmured about hidden weapons aboard the battleships, devices capable of wiping out fleets in seconds. Nobody knew for certain, but everyone understood one thing: the galaxy wasn't ready for what was coming. In engineering, the hum of reactors had taken on a deeper tone, the strain evident in the flicker of readouts. Chief engineers worked in silence, their eyes darting between monitors and the glow of containment fields. One wrong fluctuation, one surge at the wrong moment, and the ship wouldn't even make it to the fight. Up in the observation deck, a young technician stood staring at the distant silhouettes. They weren't dots anymore, they had shape, mass, a presence that seemed to press against the mind. She wondered if the enemy crew aboard those massive hulls felt the same kind of weight, or if their size gave them a sense of invincibility. A sudden ping on the long-range sensors pulled every gaze back to the main display. The lead battleship had activated something, an energy surge so massive it distorted the local space around it. The effect rippled outward, bending the light of distant stars. Nobody spoke, but the meaning was clear. Whatever was coming would be unleashed long before the 2 fleets met in traditional range. The captain leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the console. That's not standard weapons fire. His tone was flat, but underneath it was the edge of someone who had just recognized a danger far greater than he'd prepared for. Then came the second shock, another surge, but this time from behind the human fleet. A separate contact, smaller but still massive, emerging from a hidden fold in space. No one had detected it before now. The bridge went cold. This wasn't just a head-on confrontation. They were being surrounded. The realization spread through the ship like a shadow. Some clenched their fists. Others stole glances at the nearest escape pods, though they knew deep down there would be no outrunning vessels of that size. The tactical officer broke the silence, voice low but clear. "Sir, if we're boxed in, they'll crush us before we can even break formation." The captain didn't respond right away. His eyes flicked between the maps and the steady advance of the battleships. The air on the bridge felt heavier, each breath slower, as if the ship itself was holding still to listen. Finally he said, "Then we changed the fight." No one asked what that meant. Not yet. But something in his tone carried both defiance and desperation. The planet-sized ships closed another few thousand kilometers. At this range, the glint of their armor caught the light from the system's sun, each reflection like a cold, unblinking eye. The human crew could now make out the intricate shapes along their surfaces, structures the size of cities, weapons arrays the size of continents. It was a scale that defied imagination. The galaxy had thought humanity's first planet-sized warship was an outlier, a once-in-history marvel. Now, faced with multiple behemoths on both sides, it was clear that the rules of war had been rewritten forever. The balance wasn't just shifting, it was shattering. Somewhere deep in the ship's lower decks, a coded transmission began to broadcast. Not to the enemy but to an unknown destination. The crew in that section didn't understand it, but they felt it. The sense that something was moving in the dark, an unseen hand shaping the battle before the first shot was even fired. The captain's voice came over the internal comms, not shouting but carrying the weight of command. "All stations, prepare for engagement. And remember, this is our fight. No one else will fight it for us." Outside, the void trembled with the energy of titans drawing closer, and every heartbeat aboard the human ships matched the slow, relentless rhythm of warships on approach. The air was electric with tension, every mind balancing between fear and the fragile hope that somehow, against all odds, they might turn the tide. But deep inside, a question burned unspoken. What if the true threat wasn't the ships ahead, but something far more dangerous already among them? The command deck was bathed in the glow of red warning lights, each pulse a reminder that the fate of more than just Earth hung in the balance. The massive planet-sized warship hung silent in the void, its hull scarred from hours of relentless assault. The enemy fleet, stretched across the stars like a steel storm, had thrown everything it had at them. Missiles, kinetic strikes, energy beams powerful enough to slice through moons. And still, somehow, the warship endured. The crew's voices were low but sharp, every word carrying urgency. They knew they were at the edge of their limits. The ship's power reserves were collapsing faster than they could reroute them. Shields were fractured, systems overheating. And yet there was no retreat. The galaxy was watching, every alien empire, every sworn enemy, every doubtful ally, waiting to see if humanity would break or stand. Then came the voice from the enemy's flagship, cold and certain, echoing across every channel: "Surrender. You cannot win. Humanity will be dismantled." The commander stood tall, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "You've misunderstood us from the start. This isn't about winning. This is about making sure you never forget us." In that moment, the final maneuver began. The ship's artificial gravity shifted slightly, a signal only the crew understood. Deep inside the warship, massive concealed ports began to open, releasing something the galaxy had never seen before. A fleet within a ship, hundreds of smaller battle craft, each bristling with weapons, designed to fight independently while still linked to the warship's core AI. The enemy's scanners lit up with new contacts, too many to track, too fast to intercept. But the warship wasn't just launching ships. It was preparing to move. Not forward into battle, but deeper, straight into the heart of the enemy's formation. It was a move no sane commander would attempt, but humanity had built these vessels to do the impossible. Every ounce of the remaining power was poured into the engines, the hull vibrating like a beast straining against its chains. The crew gritted their teeth as the ship accelerated. The enemy's fire intensified, ripping across their shields and tearing at their armor, but the warship's massive bulk kept pushing through, shrugging off what should have been fatal hits. Then, without warning, the warship's outer plates shifted, revealing what lay beneath: a colossal array of magnetic acceleration rails that ran the length of the ship. The enemy realized too late what was about to happen. With a thunder that could not be heard but was felt in the bones, the warship unleashed a single, planet-cracking kinetic slug. It wasn't aimed at a single ship, it was aimed at the center of the enemy's entire fleet. The slug tore through their ships like they were paper, shattering formations, detonating reactors, scattering survivors into the cold black void. Silence followed. In the chaos, the enemy flagship tried to withdraw, but the warship's secondary fleet closed in from all sides. The commander's voice cut through once more: "You wanted to know what humanity was capable of. Now you know." The enemy's surrender came minutes later. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread like wildfire. Worlds that had mocked humanity now spoke of them with a new weight in their words. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's balance had shifted, and it tilted toward Earth. But even as the crew celebrated, the ship's sensors picked up something strange. The slug they had fired, so massive it should have slowed in the void, had not stopped. It had vanished. Not into debris, not into the far reaches of space, but into a distortion, a ripple in reality itself. And then the impossible happened. The distortion began to widen. From it, a new shape emerged, not alien, not enemy, but something that carried the unmistakable design of humanity's own engineering, yet impossibly older. The markings on its hull were in a language no living human had ever spoken. The crew stared in silence, their victory still fresh, their celebration frozen mid-breath. The war had been won, but the warship that emerged from the rift was not from their time. It was theirs, and it had been waiting. The dust of battle still clung to the air, drifting like the last whispers of a nightmare that had finally begun to fade. The hum of the planet-sized warships was quieter now, not the thunderous roar of defiance but a deep, steady pulse, like the slow heartbeat of a survivor catching its breath. Humanity had done it. Against every expectation, against the balance of power the galaxy had lived under for centuries, they had stood, fought, and won. The crew aboard the flagship moved like people who didn't quite believe it yet. Some leaned against the railings, staring out through massive viewports at the scattered remains of enemy fleets. Others worked quietly at their stations, their voices low, as if afraid to break whatever fragile spell had settled over them. The great ship was scarred, its armor blackened and pitted, but it still stood. And that mattered more than anything. In the distance, the wreckage of what had been the enemy's flagship tumbled in slow, silent arcs, pieces catching the light of a nearby sun. It was over, yet the silence felt heavier than the battle itself. Everyone knew the galaxy wouldn't see this as the end. It was a beginning, a dangerous one. The old order had been shattered. The balance was gone. And now every power, every ruler, every distant world was staring at Earth, wondering what humanity would do next. On the bridge, a few exchanged tired smiles, the kind that carried relief but also the weight of memory. They thought of the friends who hadn't made it back, of the sacrifices that had carried them to this moment. In war, even victory tastes of loss. The warships began to form up, their immense shadows moving together across the void. From the outside, they looked unstoppable, giants carved from the dreams of a civilization that had refused to kneel. But inside, the people were just that, people. Flawed, wounded, proud, terrified of what would come next. A message came in from one of the smaller vessels. Reports of distress signals scattered across the system. Survivors. Enemy and ally both. There was a moment of silence on the bridge, then the order was given without hesitation. Send rescue crews. It didn't matter who they had been fighting an hour ago. Out here, floating in the cold, survival came first. That was something humanity refused to compromise on. One by one, shuttles launched, weaving between debris fields to pull stranded crews from the wreckage. Some of the rescued looked at their human saviors with open gratitude. Others stared with quiet, unsettled suspicion. No matter. This was the choice humanity had made, to lead by action, not fear. Days passed as the fleet moved away from the battlefield. Repairs began. Messages from across the galaxy flooded in, some filled with cautious respect, others with barely veiled threats. Alliances would shift. New enemies would rise. But something had changed in the heart of the human crews. They had proven to themselves and to everyone watching that they were not the fragile newcomers many had assumed. One night cycle aboard the flagship, a small group gathered in the observation deck. Stars stretched endlessly before them, the dark void flecked with light. No speeches were made, no formal ceremonies. They simply stood together in silence, the enormity of what they'd done settling in. Somewhere in that silence was pride. Somewhere in it was fear. But above all, there was a quiet understanding. They were now a part of something bigger than any single battle. For centuries, the galaxy had been ruled by those who claimed power by sheer force. But now there was a new kind of power in the mix, the kind that came from resilience, unity, and the refusal to bow. Humanity's planet-sized warships weren't just weapons, they were symbols. And symbols have a way of echoing far longer than the sound of gunfire. When Earth received the fleet's return signal, entire cities lit up. Families gathered around screens, watching the live transmission as the massive ships came into orbit. They looked like dark moons against the curve of the planet. Cheers rose from streets and towers. Somewhere, in a quiet home far from the capital, a child looked up at the sky that night and saw one of the warships drift across the stars. She asked her mother if the people on it were heroes. Her mother smiled softly, eyes glistening, and said, "They're people who didn't give up." Weeks later, the War Council convened in orbit, bringing together leaders from every allied world. The discussions were long, tense, and full of unspoken fears. Some argued humanity should press their advantage, to take control before others could rise against them. But the decision that emerged was different. The warships would stand as guardians, not conquerors. Humanity would not become the thing they had just fought against. It was a gamble. The galaxy might see it as weakness. But to those who had walked the decks of the great ships, who had fought and bled to keep them standing, it was strength of another kind. In the end, the fleet dispersed, not to seize worlds but to watch over them. Planet by planet, the warships would appear in orbit when trouble stirred, their vast presence a reminder of what humanity was capable of. Sometimes, just the shadow of a guardian was enough to keep the peace. Years later, veterans of the battle would still talk about the moment the enemy flagship fell. Not as a tale of dominance, but as the day the galaxy realized the balance had shifted forever. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the great ships as they patrolled the stars, there was always the echo of that choice. The moment when humanity decided what kind of power they would be. The galaxy had expected conquerors. What it got instead was something harder to predict, harder to control. Humanity had taken its place among the great powers, but on its own terms. And in the endless night of space, those planet-sized warships drifted like watchful giants, carrying not just weapons, but the hopes of an entire species. Because in the end, the warships were more than steel and fire. They were a promise. And promises are harder to destroy than any fleet.